Hello and welcome to this demo from Replicated. My name is Alex Parker and I'm a Senior Product Manager here at Replicated. And today I'm going to demonstrate for you the vendor Day 2 experience. Now Day 2 involves everything that happens after the end user has installed their vendor's application into their own environment. In general, this is where end users can get a lot of additional value out of Replicated. And this can include a lot of things, but today we're going to focus on two specific parts of this experience. We're going to look at what we call disconnected troubleshooting, which I'll explain in just a minute, and also snapshots, which allow you to back up and restore the state of the application in the admin console for rollbacks or for disaster recovery. Now, disconnected troubleshooting describes a scenario where there's an asymmetry of knowledge and access between the vendor and the end user. So the vendor has knowledge of the application and how to debug and troubleshoot it, but the end user has access to the environment and the infrastructure in which that application is running. So debugging and support situations here can often look like a lot of back and forth where the vendor asks for access to logs, the end user provides them, the vendor investigates them, they need more information, and you end up with this back and forth. Disconnected troubleshooting is a way that Replicated enables better troubleshooting that allows vendors to codify important support and troubleshooting information and let end users generate that information, view it, and analyze it, and hopefully be able to remediate some of their own issues. So let's go ahead and get started with this demonstration. We're going to pick up right where we left off at the end of the Day 1 demo. So if you have not watched that one yet, go back and take a look at it first, and we're going to pick up right at the end of that. We're going to start by putting on our vendor hat, because in order to enable disconnected troubleshooting and backup snapshots for your end users, a vendor needs to make some changes to their release. So let's head over to Vendor Portal in order to do that. I've already hit the Create Release button, so I can create a new release, and I'm going to add two new resources to this release. The first I'll talk about here is the support bundle. So the support bundle resource is used for disconnected troubleshooting. Basically, when an end user generates a support bundle, that support bundle collects information from the cluster. It could be logs, information on Kubernetes resources, or much more. It can redact sensitive information that's present in those logs, and then finally perform analysis on the data to hopefully provide some remediation steps to fix the problem at hand. So this support bundle kind right here defines what information we want to collect and analyze. So to show you what we're doing here, we have a collector for logs. So basically we're going to collect logs for any resources that have these selectors on them. So tier equals front end or tier equals back end, which are selectors that are used on the guestbook application. Any of those resources, we're going to collect logs for those, and we have some stipulations about the max age and the max line, so we can constrain how many logs we collect. And now the interesting part for this demo is going to be this analyzer right here. So let's say that this guestbook is really powerful and it performs machine learning and it needs a GPU to be present in the cluster in order to perform its duties. So we could write an analyzer that would detect whether or not a GPU was present in the cluster and use that for supportability. So this analyzer right here is going to filter, and it's going to search for nodes that have the feature equals GPU label on them. And we can look at the outcomes and say that if there is ever less than one, if we run this and there's less than one node that has the filter equals GPU label on it, then we're going to print out a message that says that this cluster does not have a node with that label, and it's going to fail. Otherwise, if there's at least one node that does have that label, then it's going to pass and it's going to say, yeah, this cluster has a GPU node, so we're all good to go. So we'll see how this comes in handy a little bit later in the demo, but that's the support bundle that we're adding to the release as a vendor. Now the second thing we're going to add is a backup resource. For snapshots, Replicated uses Valero. And so in order to enable snapshots for end users, a vendor needs to include this backup resource in their release. This is just the minimum that you can provide, so the spec is empty here. And what that means is that the backup is going to include the admin console as well as the application data, so all of the Kubernetes resources that make up that application. It's not going to back up any of the volumes that might be present with that application. If you want to do that, you have to use annotations and actually annotate the volumes that you want to be backed up. Because the guestbook doesn't have any volumes, I'm not going to show you how to do that, but check out our documentation to see what those annotations are. And similarly, if you ever wanted to exclude resources from the backup, let's say you had a secret that you didn't want to include in the snapshot, then you can also use an annotation to exclude a Kubernetes resource from the backup. So we have this minimum backup here, and that's going to work for us for this demonstration. So we have added the support bundle and the backup resource to our release. So at this point, we're good to go. So let's save this release. And let's promote it. Let's update the release notes here. We're going to do it to the stable channel. So let's update the release notes just to say that we have included the backup and support bundle resources. And we'll promote that. All right, so now that we've released that, let's put on the end user hat and come back to the admin console. So now that that release has been promoted, let's check for an update. And the admin console is going to pull that update in. Obviously, there's the pre-flight checks that are going to run and everything like that. I'm going to go ahead and just hit deploy because we know what this change is. And I'm just going to ignore the pre-flights for the sake of moving through this a little more quickly. Now, as this was deploying, I immediately noticed a change. You might not have seen it, but this Snapshots tab appeared right up here. Now, if I go over to this, because the backup resource is now included in this release, I have access to the Snapshots tab. So if I'm an end user and I want to start leveraging backups, which of course I do, the first thing I need to do is install Valero, because we have to have Valero installed to perform these backups. And then from there, we can choose what type of backup, what storage destination we want to use. So I already have a command ready in this application, in this, targeting this Kubernetes cluster to install Valero. So I'm going to go ahead and run that just to get this started. But if we come up here and look at this command again, I'll just highlight a couple of key things. I'm going to install Valero into the Valero namespace. There's a secret file that is called Valero credentials that's present in this directory, and that is the credentials for my Amazon, my AWS S3 bucket. So you can see here that I'm choosing my provider as AWS, and my bucket is called Alex Replicated Snapshots, and that's in the region US East 1. So this credential file includes credentials for that bucket. So by running this, I'm installing Valero into the cluster, and I'm also configuring my backup storage location to be this bucket in S3. And if we head over back to here, I can just show you real quick that this is that bucket in Amazon and AWS S3. I've got Alex Replicated Snapshots, and it's currently empty. I haven't used this bucket yet. I haven't backed anything up to it. So it's currently empty. There's no objects here, but we will use that momentarily. So coming back to here, I can see that this was all successfully installed. So I'm going to return to the admin console, and there's a button here where I can check for Valero. And this is just going to ensure that Valero is installed, and as you can see, it is. So I'm going to click Got It because we've got it installed, and it's already populated my storage destination information. It knows I'm using Amazon S3. It's got my bucket name and my region, and it's got my credentials. I could also provide a path within that bucket if I wanted to. Now, one great thing about snapshots is that you can schedule them to be performed automatically. Obviously, you don't know when a disaster is going to occur, when you're going to need to roll back. So having snapshots automatically turned on and scheduled is a great way to ensure that you've always got a snapshot available should you need to back up, should you need to restore in the event of a disaster or a rollback. You can provide retention policies for how long you want to keep those snapshots and things like that. Now, one other thing to note is that there's two types of snapshots that you can take with Replicated, a full snapshot and a partial snapshot. We recommend just using full snapshots because full snapshots back up both the admin console and the application, whereas the partial snapshot only backs up the application. So a partial snapshot could be used for a rollback, but it doesn't work for disaster recovery because it doesn't include the admin console. So we recommend using the full snapshots instead because they'll work for both use cases. So I'm going to go ahead and start a snapshot. And this is going to back up the resources that were defined in that backup resource that we included. So it's just going to be the standard stuff, the admin console, as well as the resources from our vendor's application. And this will take just a minute to generate. You can see that it's in progress. It'll take just a minute to perform. But basically what we've done now is we've got a known good state that we could return to. We know that our application was up and running, and this is our known good state that we can return to in the event of a problem down the line. So we won't use this just yet in the demo, but we'll keep this in mind and come back to it towards the end to demonstrate how we could actually do a restore with this. Now moving back to here, let's begin to look at the disconnected troubleshooting. So obviously for disconnected troubleshooting, the whole point is that there's a problem with the application that needs to be debugged and remediated. So let's fast forward a little bit in time, and our vendor will have released a new version to us that has a problem. All right, at this point in time, our vendor has gone off, they've released a new version of their application, and they've promoted it so it's now available to us as the end user. So let's check for an update in order to pull that new version in. And we'll head over to the version history page, and let's look at the release notes to figure out what this update's all about. So version 0.13 requires a GPU node. That's the change that they made with this new version. As an end user, I might know, nice, I knew that the guestbook was going to need a GPU. I've already got a GPU in my cluster. That sounds good. So I'm happy to go ahead and deploy this because I'm confident that this change is going to work in my environment. So I'm going to go ahead and hit deploy. Again, I'm going to ignore the pre-flights for the sake of time here. And I'm going to go ahead and deploy this new version of the application. We can see here that it's deploying. It'll take just a couple of minutes for all the resources to be applied and the changes to be made. We'll head back over to the dashboard, and here we see the status, right? So this can change. You need to give this a little bit of time sometimes to smooth out as the Kubernetes resources come up and are made available. But you can click details and kind of see what the situation is. So in this case, I can see that my Redis leader and follower are ready, but the front-end deployment is not available. It's degraded. So there seems to be some kind of problem with that front-end deployment. Now, without replicated, at this point, this is where more than likely the end user would say, this isn't my application. I don't know how to fix this. Maybe the end user's not particularly adept with Kubernetes, so they don't even know how to begin looking into this. And they'd probably call up their vendor. They would talk to them, and this is where we'd begin that back and forth of the vendor needing some logs so they could dig into it, need additional information, and it could just be this long back and forth process to get to the bottom of it. Well, since the vendor included a support bundle with this release, the best place to start would be for the end user to generate a support bundle and try to dig into this themselves first. So let's head over to the Troubleshoot tab, and we can analyze the guest book. So if I push this, I'm going to actually generate a support bundle. Now these can take a little while to run, but basically this is going to do all that stuff we described earlier, where it's going to collect information about the cluster and redact any information and then perform some analysis on that information and hopefully provide some insights into what's going on here. So this can take a little bit of time, so I'm going to just skip through this and wait for this to be complete. All right, you can see that the support bundle has been generated, and we're immediately brought to this view that shows us some of the errors or warnings that the support bundle is noticing. So off the bat, we can see here that our replica set, our front-end replica set, isn't ready. And the front-end deployment also isn't ready. It has 3 of 5 replicas. Now, presumably, those are some of the replicas from the previous deployment, and then the new replicas aren't coming up for this new deployment. So there's something going on with the front-end deployment. And we've got one more, which is existence of GPU nodes. So this is what we actually put into the support bundle. As you'll recall earlier, the vendor put this into their support bundle to notify that this cluster does not have a node with the feature equals GPU label. So immediately an end user who's adept enough with Kubernetes can see this and say, oh, interesting. Okay, so I've got a GPU node in this cluster, but it's not labeled appropriately. It doesn't have the right Kubernetes label on it to indicate that it's a GPU node. So if I go and add this feature equals GPU label to that node, presumably that is going to fix my problem and the deployment is going to proceed as expected. There's probably a node selector on this deployment to ensure that the front end only runs on the GPU node. Now so this is great. We've successfully created a situation where there was a problem within the cluster, but the end user was able to collect information and have that information analyzed and present them with clear steps on what they can do to ameliorate the problem. But even in the event that the end user isn't sufficiently able to dig into this and find the root cause and fix it, the support bundle is still immensely valuable because the support bundle can be downloaded. And once it's downloaded, it can actually be sent over to the vendor who can analyze it themselves. So putting back on our vendor hat, if we come over to the vendor portal and we go to the troubleshoot page here, we're actually able to upload a support bundle. So I'm going to click this and I'm going to drag my support bundle right here and upload it. That'll take just a moment. And I can see that the vendor is able to see the same exact information that the customer, the end user, was able to see in their environment. They can see these same errors, and surely the vendor will see existence of GPU node, and they'll know exactly what needs to be fixed in this situation, and they can relay that information to the end user. So support bundles are immensely valuable in this disconnected troubleshooting sort of situation, because you're able to codify all of that support and troubleshooting information into a bundle that's generated at the click of a button, and it enables end users to investigate and look into problems themselves and hopefully find remediation steps right there. But even if they can't, they can send that bundle off to their vendor for the vendor to look into, and that prevents the need for the vendor to ask for logs and that whole back and forth that ensues to get the right information. The support bundle gets all the information that the vendor thinks is needed for troubleshooting and wraps it up and provides this insight. So putting back on the end user hat, it seems to me like we need to have the feature equals GPU label applied to one of our nodes. So let's come back to here and we'll use kube control and we'll get our nodes. So let's find which nodes we have present in this cluster. And I'm just going to pick one. It doesn't really matter which one it is. Kube control, label this node with the feature equals GPU label. Nice. So we successfully applied that label to one of these nodes, and that should solve this problem. Now what I'm going to do real quick is I'm just going to delete all of the pods that are a part of the front end, just to save us a little bit of time. If I delete them, then they'll just get recreated and see the node, the label on the node more quickly. So I'm just going to do that real fast to speed up that detection process, even though Kubernetes would have detected that automatically at some point anyway. So coming back to the admin console as the end user, I can wait and see if my status improves. So it's still showing that my front end is degraded, but it probably just takes a little bit of time for this to work its way through. And if this user was sufficiently adept with Kubernetes, they could actually get the deployments here and see that there's 4 of 4 front-end pods that are ready and available, which is a great sign. So if we come back here and refresh the page, it might take a little bit of time for the status informers to detect it, but this degraded status should change to ready. There it is. So that's awesome. We have successfully ameliorated and fixed and remediated our own problem in this environment using a support bundle, which is awesome. Now, one more thing we can think about is that snapshot that we took earlier. So if we come over, I never showed the bucket, which is actually going to show the backup information. So we've got the backup information successfully stored in S3. And we could use that if we ever encountered a situation where we needed to roll back or a disaster recovery scenario. Let's say we weren't ever able to fix this GPU issue. There was actually a bug in the code that was causing a problem. Or maybe something happened in the cluster and the admin console got deleted in some way or was compromised and we needed to restore to a known good state. Well, we took a snapshot, so we have the ability to restore from that snapshot and bring us back to that known state. Now remember, we took the snapshot before we deployed this new version, so we'll be able to check how well the snapshot worked because we should see fewer releases available if we restore from this snapshot. So if I go to the Snapshots tab and click the Restore from Snapshot button, I can see that there's either a full or a partial restore. Partial restores can be performed right here within the admin console. A full restore needs to be done from the command line because it's actually going to delete the admin console and recreate it as part of that full restore. So you'll lose access to the admin console during this. So I've copied that command. I'm going to come over to my terminal and I'm going to run that. And it's going to go ahead and delete the admin console and then eventually restore the admin console as well as restoring my application. Again, this takes a little bit of time, so we'll check back in once this is done to see how this restore process went. All right, so at this point, the restore has completed. We can see that as a part of that, the admin console was deleted and then it was restored. And then we restored the applications that were deployed or, included with that admin console, so our current version and any previous versions that we had received. And now the restore has completed successfully. So let's just check and make sure that the connection to the admin console probably got broken when it was deleted and then restored. So we'll just reestablish that port forward. And then let's come back here and we can see that we're back. And if we look at the version history, we see we've only got these three initial versions that we had, right? We have 0.10, 0.11, and 0.12. So those versions, the version that we created for the GPUs after we took the snapshot isn't here because we snapshotted first and now we've rolled ourselves back to this known good state. So thank you so much for tuning into this demo. Today we've learned a lot about the vendor day 2 experience that's a part of Replicated. Specifically, we looked at how a vendor needs to include a backup resource so that they can enable snapshots for their end users. And we looked at how they can include a support bundle to codify common support issues and remediation steps into that support bundle so that end users can generate a support bundle and then use that information for troubleshooting and debugging. We saw how to install Valero into our cluster and set up a storage destination so that we could take snapshots using Valero for backup and restore, and we took a snapshot. We saw how when we upgraded to a version that caused a problem, we could go and generate a support bundle, and that support bundle would analyze the collected data and show us things that were wrong in the cluster so that we could dig into those specific things. And we also saw that if the end user isn't able to dig into those problems themselves, they can still take that generated support bundle and pass it on to their vendor, who can upload it to the vendor portal and view the same information to quickly and easily help their end user with troubleshooting. And finally, we saw how we could use the snapshot that we took and do a full restore to restore both the admin console and the application in the cluster and return ourselves to a known good state. So thank you very much for tuning in, and look forward to seeing you again soon in another Replicated demo.